I talk a lot about transit modes that are used in the wrong way, from light rail that should have been metro, metro that should have been suburban rail, and buses that probably shouldn't have been buses. But in my quest to see the positive side, and because a lot of people have requested it, I wanted to make a video about the right place to use various transit modes. And of course, to some extent, there is a gray area. A bi-articulated trolley bus is pretty similar to a tram in a lot of ways. So let's talk about where different types of transit can thrive. Welcome to RM Transit, where we talk about buses, trains, trams, funiculars, gondolas, and everything in between. The most basic transit mode is the bus, and I've probably spent most of my time riding public transit on them, from going to school as a kid to going to university as an adult. Buses are great in that they're super flexible, run on existing roads, and are inexpensive to spin up. It's also pretty easy to expand their capacity. They also have the ability to provide a true door-to-door service in a way that you really can't get unless you live in an MTR-built apartment building over an MTR station in Hong Kong. Now, the usual shortcomings of buses are: 1, they're expensive to operate because the capacity for a single driver to move people is limited. 2, their flexibility can be a downfall because people aren't entirely sure if a stop or route will be staying in the long term. And 3, they often get thrown into difficult situations where they don't have enough capacity or where they aren't particularly fast, which gives people a bad impression of them. That being said, you can amp up your bus capacity by opting for double-decker or articulated buses, and speed with transitways or highway buses like you see in Brisbane or in Vancouver. But at the end of the day, you just have to remember that buses are pricey to run, which is a bit of why I see bus rapid transit as a bit of a trap in extremely high demand applications like in Guangzhou or Bogota. Trams are in many ways related to buses. It's often thought that buses mostly replaced trams in the mid-20th century. Both modes often operate on street, and both modes often have a short step up into the vehicle. While I often complain about light rail and trams being used in places where they don't really excel, they are incredibly adaptable. They can run elevated or on the street or in tunnels. They can have high floors or low floors or be single units or coupled into longer trains. And this can be both a strength and a weakness. Modern trams like those that have proliferated from France to the rest of the world tend to work best when they serve local trips in dense areas, with fairly closely spaced station stops and pedestrian and transit-oriented street redesigns that prioritize the trams going fast. A local bus route that isn't super long but is perennially busy is a great example of the type of bus route that makes sense to convert into a tram. And since almost every tram in the world is electric, a bus-to-tram conversion is likely to also reduce emissions and also operating costs. Trams are also super compatible with nice urban infrastructure. Want to run a tram through a public square? You can. And you can let people interchange between different tram routes by walking along nice sidewalks. It's a really useful mode in a well-planned city. Even for some really long journeys, trams can sometimes be appropriate. For example, connecting smaller urban centers that are widely spaced out with tram trains that can operate on train tracks between urban centers, but then operate on streets within them. The main risk you run with trams is that they require a lot more investment than a bus, but they don't have an order of magnitude more capacity like a subway. That means if you build the wrong thing or underestimate how much capacity you're going to need, it can be a very expensive situation. While you might remove a successful express bus and convert it into a subway, that's a much more expensive thing to do with a tram, even though it does happen. The success of trams is also highly dependent on hard-to-define planning and design decisions, such as particular context-dependent street design and transit priority measures. While most trams do look nice, without great right-of-way design and smart planning, they won't move all that fast, which tends to make them less of a plug-and-play solution, even if the appearance is quite the opposite. For example, compare the slow, painful Toronto streetcar system to the fast and efficient Parisian trams. They look similar, but they operate completely differently. Finally, you do have to consider costs. While subways and railways often just avoid streets entirely and so avoid impacts associated with them, trams typically do run on streets, which can mean a lot of utility relocation and other expensive construction work and disruption, especially in English-speaking countries. Trains are many people's favorite form of public transit, and they can be a fantastic solution for longer journeys, from intercity travel to suburban commutes. And systems like S-Bahns, the RER, the Elizabeth Line, and Japanese and Korean through-running subways show you how you can turn mainline rail into a cross-city rapid transit service. But building new rail lines is typically quite expensive and difficult. Burying or elevating them isn't cheap, and building new right-of-ways, particularly in developed areas, is extremely difficult. Which means cities are often limited to the lines they already had before their urban population exploded, unless they want to spend a lot of money. I'd say that many of the issues with trains are technical. While you can buy off-the-shelf trams with standard electrification and signaling, trains vary widely from country to country and even from city to city, with different gauges, signaling systems, electrification, and even platform heights. The best type of infrastructure to build also varies widely, depending on the climate and the type of environment you're in, since trains tend to almost always be above ground and usually not embedded in streets. At the same time, in a lot of places, train infrastructure is legacy infrastructure, so maintaining it is no small task. The development of subways sort of happened as this convergence from trains and from trams. Trams were too low capacity and limited in their frequency by conflicts with pedestrians and cars, while trains were too large to go into city centers. That is, before tunneling and electrification technology were quite what they are today. The dual development from different directions means that subways often play different roles in different places. In Paris, for example, the metro is almost like a high-capacity express tramway. It's only just below the street, has small trains, and incredibly tight stop spacings. Whereas in New York, the subway acts almost like a mainline railway, with local and express tracks and giant trains that can be 8, 10, or even 11 cars long. While not quite as adaptable as trams, subways are still super flexible. You can go above ground, you can go below ground, and you can even operate on railway corridors, sometimes even with level crossings. And to be fair, some subway systems use tram-style vehicles. Probably the main weakness of subways is their cost and urban integration challenges. A subway is a great transit service, but if it's not heavily used, you're not getting a lot of value, especially because you do need to maintain all of that very complicated infrastructure. At the same time, the need for grade separation usually means lots of tunneling and limited opportunities to save money with various cost-saving measures. Passengers often also have to circulate in deep, confusing underground stations where they can't easily orient themselves to the city and where they can't just stop into a cafe for a quick bite while they're interchanging. Of course, these things can be mitigated, but it's hard to get them right. It also seems to me that as you add more and more subways and other underground infrastructure to your city, your costs kind of increase exponentially, while with trams it can be a lot simpler. And yes, maybe this is offset by capacity, but I find it really interesting how Lyon and Vienna managed to add tramline after tramline without having to build a ton of grade separations or other expensive infrastructure, and while increasing capacity significantly. With the subway system, you build just a few underground lines and suddenly you're building really complicated underground interchange stations. Now, while we usually talk about buses, trains, and trams on RM Transit, there are some other major transit modes I do want to mention. Ferries are slow and expensive to operate, but they can move huge numbers of people. They also operate on free and open right-of-ways that are even more flexible than roads, and the services can be spun up incredibly quickly, making them very powerful in coastal cities or places with lots of waterways. Gondolas and aerial trams can be super useful for connecting to hilly areas, whether that be up to the top of a hill or from one hill to another, or even just to cross a major barrier, like the gondola in London. They're also super cheap, very reliable, and incredibly frequent. But they aren't extremely high speed, and you have to shut them down periodically for cable replacement, which works well for ski hills that might not be running their lifts in the summer, but less well for urban transit. On first appearance, funiculars appear a lot like gondolas, transit for going up hills. But funiculars operate on rails, which means they're less able to handle crazy landscapes. That being said, funiculars can handle dense urban landscapes, and many of the most famous funiculars in the world are partially or entirely underground and very old. The main limitation, since it's inherent to their design, is that funiculars have just 2 cabins, which limits their capacity. The last mode I want to mention are people movers. I just wrote an article on them in my blog, so it's worth checking that out, but to summarize, people movers are often used like a crutch. People movers do a lot of the same things that subways do, but they're lower capacity and more expensive. So then why would you ever use one? Well, it's sort of like a subway in a box. It's very easy to deploy, even in a place where you don't exactly have a subway system already existing, such as at an airport or to connect the transit system to an airport. Even though they're expensive, in the right place, that price might be worth it. There are also some more general rules that I think it's worth thinking about for different transit modes. Something you've probably noticed is that as you go for bigger and bigger and bigger vehicles, from buses to trams to trains, flexibility tends to decrease and construction costs tend to increase. And this makes basic geometric sense. A bus is going to be more nimble than a tram, which is going to be more nimble than a train. And so to install the infrastructure for a tram or a train, it's going to be both more complicated and take up more space. But the other side of the coin here is that since you're generally going to build less, more expensive things, and because the geometry is inherently less flexible, higher capacity modes with larger vehicles tend to be able to travel faster. And since their larger size lets you move more people on a per person basis, the cost of transit actually goes down. And you'll usually want that capacity for the limited number of mainline rail routes any given city typically has, because there tends to be a lot of demand for coarse, high-level city area transit before you're distributed to local neighborhoods on buses or trams. It's also important to consider that it's easier to manage a line with too much capacity, but easier to build when you have lines with too little, since you're going to be building a lot. The ultimate lesson though, if there is one to be had, is that there is not a best transit mode, simply different ones with different trade-offs. I'd love to see a future where people talk about the different modes not by their features, like the ability to run on street, but by the outcomes of those features, like having more limited speeds, but being able to have nicer urban integration. Thanks for watching.